The contaminated zone is a world very different from the one we know. The Great War, Vault-Tec experiments, the radioactive Holocaust, and 1,000 other factors have turned what was once US soil into a terrifying melting pot of oddities and monstrosities that, from the abandoned recesses where they had been forgotten, have finally spilled out like plagues and spread throughout the game world. Horrific, grotesque, and extremely dangerous creatures now inhabit these lands, making travel across the continent an increasingly risky and unpredictable endeavor. These beings have adapted to the post-apocalyptic world even more than humans themselves, and have thus found a way not only to survive, but even to proliferate. Today, we will discover some of the most frightening aberrations we might encounter while exploring the world of Fallout: mutated beasts. Let's start with something easy, something we might consider almost familiar. After the nuclear winter, not only humans, but many common creatures had to deal with the enormous amount of radiation that enveloped everything. The key to survival has always been adaptation, and only those who somehow managed not to succumb and evolve had the chance to carry on their species. There are many beasts that we could easily recognize as descendants of something familiar, but which have now become strange or developed new and unpredictable physical characteristics. After all, radiation opens up endless possibilities, and you never know what paths various animals may have decided to take. Brahmins are nothing more than the heirs of the old cattle that developed an additional head. At first glance, this is the main feature that distinguishes them, but in reality, many of their organs have doubled in number compared to their pre-apocalypse counterparts. Despite their grotesque appearance, Brahmins perfectly fulfill the same role as their ancestors, being used not only to produce extremely nutritious meat, but also milk, fertilizer, and they are also extraordinary beasts of burden. Along the same lines, we also find the bighorners, mutant sheep that are significantly larger than their originals, and have equally larger and harder heads and horns. Fortunately, they too are generally harmless creatures, so much so that they have been domesticated by many modern communities. Let's take a step forward and start talking about something a little more dangerous. Not only domesticated animals, but also many predators have had to take a forced step forward in the evolutionary ladder. Refinement of their predatory instincts, perfection of their natural weapons, and often a frightening increase in size. These are the weapons available to the new generations of predators in the contaminated area. Insects are perhaps among the most insidious creatures one can encounter today. Cockroaches, flies, and mosquitoes have in many cases grown to frightening sizes and have become real threats to travelers in the contaminated zone. Imagine a swarm of bloatflies, flies as big as basketballs and as aggressive as wasps. They would have no trouble taking down an adult man in a matter of seconds. Many small mammals have suffered a similar fate. Rats, moles, and even many dogs, forced to survive in a completely contaminated world, have become larger, more rabid, and feral, so much so that they will attack any other creature on sight in search of food. Pig rats, for example, are a perfect example of unpredictable hybrid evolution. It's impossible to identify them as descendants of one species or the other. With a rat-like head but a distinctly pig-like snout, they are ravenous and aggressive beasts, capable of attacking with both sharp claws and rodent-like fangs. In the contaminated zone, it's said that they perfectly combine the malice of rats with the bottomless hunger of pigs. Truly delightful creatures. Finally, at the top of this category are 3 particularly dangerous creatures, capable of quickly dispatching any unwary player who decides to face them without proper equipment. The first is the gulper, a creature resembling a salamander but whose adult specimens surpass the size of a human. Native to the East Coast, they are thought to be the result not only of common radiation, but also of the mysterious fog that constantly covers Mount Desert Island. They are cunning enemies, often seen clinging to trees or lampposts, waiting to ambush passersby. Another mutated beast that should definitely be avoided is the Yao Guai, a hairless bear of larger-than-life size and exceptionally aggressive nature. Bears are already fearsome creatures in their own right, but the Yao Guai have thick skin that can withstand even numerous bullets, extreme life force, and the ability to take down a character in just a few hits. An encounter with this creature, at worst, means a serious risk of game over. At best, it means a massive drain on all your resources before you can take it down. Megasloths are sloths that, due to radiation, have grown to an enormous size, far larger than an average human. They have long, sharp claws, generally used for climbing rather than fighting. Many can live for centuries, and the oldest specimens often contain entire colonies of mushrooms whose poisonous spores discourage enemies from attacking. Unlike the 2 previous mutated beasts, megasloths are actually quite quite peaceful creatures and rarely attack the player unless prompted. However, once combat begins, they prove to be formidable foes, intelligent enough to even use the poison in their mushrooms as a battle resource. Bloodworms. Not only land creatures, but also those of the deep sea have inevitably suffered the consequences of the apocalypse. The ocean has always concealed mysteries and terrifying beasts. These beings, in the decades following the Great War, decided to emerge, more dangerous than ever, ready to reclaim the terrestrial world as well. Let's investigate together some of the most terrifying specimens we might encounter. Remember Tremors? Those movies with man-eating worms as big as cars? Well, bloodworms are a wonderful nod to this franchise. Fortunately, they don't reach the size of their cinematic cousins, but their hunger for flesh is certainly no less. Once exclusively aquatic creatures, after the bombs fell, they learned to adapt to life on land. They reached a size comparable to that of a human, and, most importantly, developed the ability to burrow into the earth almost as easily as they once swam in the ocean. Their appearance has also changed, having to adapt to the need to move across solid ground. Their skin, once soft and viscous, is now covered with a solid exoskeleton from which emerge several spikes that the creature uses to plow through even the toughest materials. Its mouth is tripartite with a split jaw, and its bite is capable of splitting rocks. Their hunting strategy is usually ambush, surprising unsuspecting creatures crossing their territory by emerging from the ground at high speed. Even the larvae, waiting to fully develop, are still dangerous. They typically hide inside the carcasses of other creatures, such as Brahmin or bighorn sheep, feeding on their flesh. They then literally explode out of them as soon as they sense a new victim approaching. Mirelurks. The next one is a truly insidious creature that has the potential to become a veritable war machine, capable of wiping out entire camps and making areas completely inaccessible to those who do not wish to meet a horrible death. Mirelurks are mutated crustaceans, and hold the record as the first mutated monster ever to appear on US soil. Their origins likely date back to before the war, with the extreme marine pollution caused by the illegal disposal of industrial waste by multinationals such as Poseidon Energy and General Atomics. Reports already referred to an anomalous increase in the crustacean's size, but they were ignored as unimportant or even used as advertising for the high quality and abundance of the fish. After the bombs fell, these creatures underwent a second mutation, transforming them into true monsters of the deep. Mirelurks live primarily in colonies, though it's not uncommon to encounter individual specimens along the coasts. They appear to possess a very precise internal hierarchy, with easily distinguishable classes. A common Mirelurk is a hybrid between a horseshoe crab and a blue crab. They are nearly as tall as an average human, and their most recognizable feature is the thick, helmet-shaped chitin shell that covers almost the entire body. This shield is extremely resistant, so much so that, in times of danger, Mirelurks often prefer to retreat inside it rather than attempt to escape. Beneath it are two main arms equipped with large claws, usually used to grasp prey, while the two smaller arms tear at its flesh. They are the equivalent of worker ants, and their tasks include protecting the nest from intruders and scavenging for food along the beaches. Despite their fearsome nature and the difficulty of hunting them due to their natural defenses, many consider Mirelurk meat a delicacy, and there are even hunters who specialize in hunting them. Alongside them are the Mirelurk hunters, a variant clearly more similar to lobsters, dedicated to actively foraging. Lacking a shell, they lack the same defenses as the workers, but they have larger, more powerful claws, ideal for taking down even large prey. They are also capable of spitting an extremely dangerous corrosive substance from a distance. They are naturally much more aggressive, but also relatively easier to take down. Just don't get too close. Now let's talk about a true heavyweight in the marine ecosystem, the Mirelurk king. This superspecies evolved completely independently from its peers, so much so that it looks much more like a humanoid hybridized with a reptile than a crustacean. Its skin is scaly and red, and its entire body is covered in long, sharp spines connected to sharp membranes that resemble a crown and a cape, giving it its name. It possesses the ability to blend into its surroundings to the point of becoming almost invisible, a deadly power when you consider that its strength is even greater than that of a Mirelurk hunter. It has even developed the unique ability of possessing both gills and lungs, making it a hunter perfectly adapted to both ocean and land. Strength, speed, cunning, and intelligence. But that's not all. It seems that the Mirelurk king is even able to establish a telepathic network with its peers, coordinating attacks during battle, a true king at the helm of his army. Finally, we come to the true pinnacle of this pyramid, a creature whose mere presence can cause entire armies to retreat, a true monster among monsters, the Mirelurk queen. Standing 25 feet tall, its appearance epitomizes all the best features of its progeny. An iron-hard shell covers its back, 6 powerful legs allow it to charge at lightning speed against its enemies, and its claws have evolved into extremely sharp scythes. It is also capable of launching a long-range acid blast that can penetrate even the toughest armor. The most most common reaction to encountering such a monster is generally to flee. Alternatively, if you absolutely must face it, it would be best to have a heavily armed battalion or weapons that match its destructive power, because the queen will not be brought down by a few simple bombs. Ghouls. Now let's move on to humans, or at least something that was once human. Even what was thought to be the most intelligent species on the planet was powerless against the terrifying power of the radiation it itself unleashed, like a mouse, building its own trap. And this time, the effects are beyond imagination. Do you know what a video game set in a post-nuclear apocalypse universe inevitably needs? Zombies. And ghouls are the closest thing we'll ever encounter. Not all contaminated humans reach this stage, but it's certain that most would have preferred to simply die from radioactive poisoning. Ghoulization is nothing more than the effect of exposure to extremely high levels of radiation. The resulting mutation has led ghouls to develop many unique characteristics. Some useful, others monstrous. A ghoul can live for centuries if it doesn't suffer any particular accidents. They are also now resistant to radiation, physical damage, and are even capable of regenerating if the damage is not too severe. Unfortunately, this doesn't seem to stop the general decay of body tissue that constantly afflicts mutants. The skin rots and shrinks, exposing the underlying muscles, and over time, they begin to lose the main soft appendages of the body, such as ears and noses, to the point of becoming uncannily similar to the undead of popular imagination. But what's worse is that often the effect of the mutation on their brain, or the simple chronic suffering many of them suffer, causes ghouls to regress, losing most of their cognitive abilities and transforming into true monsters. Ghouls who retain their sanity usually prefer to live in close communities with other ghouls, ashamed of their appearance, but no one is surprised by their existence anymore, and aside from a few extremist factions, most communities happily accept their presence. Those who go mad are condemned to live in a near infinite hell, wandering for decades in the place of their transformation, waiting for some passerby to relieve them of their pain. There are numerous cases of shelters or vaults inhabited solely by feral ghouls, sealed in their desperate doom since the outbreak of the Great War. One final curiosity. Not only can humans transform into ghouls, but there have also been cases of animals developing this mutation. In particular, among the people of Boston, there has long been a legend of a ghoulified whale present in the bay, said to have lived there for over 200 years. Trogs. Ghoulification, however, is not the only terrible path down which mutation can push the human species. There are equally, if not more, undesirable variants. What was once the city of Pittsburgh is now nothing more than a disaster zone, ironically nicknamed the Pit by its inhabitants. In this area, radiation and the poisons produced over the years by the city's numerous industries have allowed the development of a new anomaly that has tormented citizens since the Great War: troglodyte degeneration contagion. This is a degenerative disease that causes extensive skin damage and alters brain chemistry, causing those infected to degenerate into veritable feral men, the trogs. According to Dr. Kundanika, a scientist and resident of the Pit, when the disease is in its early stages, simply leaving the area for a few months is enough to completely cure the illness. However, according to the doctor's research, as many as 20% of all adults in the Pit are destined to transform into trogs if left untreated. Furthermore, generation after generation, more and more children are born already infected and with a very low chance of survival. The trogs, once fully transformed, lose all memory of their past lives. Many of them live in small groups at the bottom of the Pit and often venture out to pillage and raid the city above. Some more evolved forms seem to preserve a sort of primitive language, understandable only by members of their own species. What's truly frightening about this disease is its utter avoidability. The inhabitants of the Pit may find a new place to live and solve this problem at its root, but now that is their home. A home that the multinationals of the old world have transformed into a contaminated grave, leaving its inhabitants in limbo between the daunting threat of disease and the terror of having to abandon what they have known as their everyday life all their lives, and from which they can no longer detach themselves. Spore carriers. In many ways, spore carriers can be compared to ghouls. They too were once human, but their bodies, corrupted by a mysterious spore, have become human-plant hybrids. Their behavior is that of a beast. Although they may possess a sort of hive mind directly connected to the spore's will, they can live indefinitely and have a high regenerative capacity guaranteed by the effect of mutation. Spore carriers originated in Vault 22, where Vault-Tec conducted experiments on fungi, plants, and mosses to develop specimens capable of sustaining humanity in the post-apocalyptic world. Among the various subjects of study was this spore with prodigious abilities. Able to attach itself to any type of plant, it allowed the host organism to become resistant to poisons, radiation, and attacks from pests. Furthermore, it was even capable of reviving practically dead subjects. Blinded by the potential of their discovery, the scientists unfortunately unfortunately failed to realize that the Spore was not only capable of bonding with plants, but with any life form. As often happens, they realized too late that almost all of them had already been infected. By the time the player arrives in Vault 22, the mutated scientists are still there, perfectly adapted to the new plant world the Spore has created, incapable of dying and ingrained only with the desire to spread their own infection. The Spore carriers appear only vaguely human. They often lie within thick bushes in a state of quiet torpor. Their faces have lost many of their original features, leaving only a mouth with sharp teeth. Their skin has turned green, and numerous inflorescences grow from their backs, helping them blend in with the surrounding vegetation. They generally move on all fours, and are known to ambush unwary visitors who approach their hiding places without realizing their presence. They use their clawed hands to slice through their enemy's flesh, but the greatest danger comes if we don't kill them quickly enough. Once they reach low health, spore carriers explode in seconds, scattering the spores they carry within them, along with a significant amount of radiation. Nothing human remains of these creatures. They have become simple yet perfect means of spreading their contamination. Tunnelers. Now, let's look at a type of creature whose origins are unclear, but which likely arose from numerous pre-war experiments aimed at creating humans with special abilities for battle. Tunnelers are creatures with an appearance somewhere between human and reptilian. Their skin is scaly, their hands have sharp claws, dangerous spikes emerge from their heads and shoulders, and two large bioluminescent yellow eyes are visible on their heads. As their name suggests, their habitat is underground. Their bodies are perfectly adapted for life underground, with hands and limbs designed for effortless digging and large fluorescent eyes ideal for perceiving their surroundings even in total darkness. However, this very evolution makes them highly susceptible to bright light, so much so that they rarely emerge to the surface. Ulysses, the main villain of the Lonesome Road DLC for Fallout New Vegas, speculates that if it weren't for their reluctance to abandon their territory, the tunnels could prove to be the greatest threat the West Coast could face, as it's impossible to know how many kilometers their tunnels extend in every direction, and therefore their true number. The entire California region could be walking across a veritable empire inhabited by hostile creatures and never even know it. Centaurs. Now let's turn the page and talk about the forced evolutionary virus, because not all mutations in the world of Fallout are caused by the simple effect of radiation. Many of the monsters we encounter are artificial, specifically modified in the laboratory in a blind race towards the most aberrant, controllable, and lethal monstrosity. The FEV is nothing more than an artificial virus developed by West Tech, with the primary goal of creating super soldiers who would revolutionize the American military. However, the serum proved unstable, causing the death of almost all of the subjects it was tested on. The desperate search for a stable solution sparked a series of research that, over the years, shaped many of the most terrifying monsters that now inhabit the new American territory. Do you like horror films? Do you have a passion for creatures so horrifying and so senseless they seem to come from another world? Then you'll be interested in learning more about centaurs. Exactly the kind of creature you wouldn't want to stumble upon in a dark forest or amid abandoned ruins. Even describing a centaur isn't easy, as each one typically has its own unique form. Let's start by saying that although some of their appendages have a human appearance, such as the torso or even the head, they are absolutely not mutated humans like ghouls or super mutants. Centaurs are, rather, a true chimera, an aberration born of terrible scientific experiments by the scientist Richard Moreau, known as the Master, creator of super mutants and advocate for a new type of humanity, driven to greater physical and mental heights thanks to the use of FEV made from parts of various animals, and subjected to the effects of the virus. Centaurs possess bestial intelligence and are more similar in character to a yaoguai than to any human. Despite the extreme diversity of each creature, we can generally identify them into three types, each more terrifying than the last. It's impossible to say what evil purpose their creation had. The most common is probably the one-headed centaur. This version has four limbs similar to human arms, which it uses to move like a quadruped. Furthermore, long tentacles emerge from its jawless mouth, which the creature uses to grasp and immobilize its prey. The two-headed centaur, on the other hand, is an even more bestial and grotesque form. In addition to its humanoid head, it also has a second animal head, often a canine one. It's been observed that each head has its own will, but they seem barely aware of being separate creatures, so much so that the animal head often attempts to bite its twin. In any case, their limited intelligence gives them no trouble directing their bodies toward common goals, such as hunting. Finally, the many-headed centaur is a specimen that was supposed to appear in the fourth installment of Fallout, but was cut during development. They are, however, present in other media outside of video games. This variant is perhaps the most grotesque you're likely to encounter. As the name suggests, multiple snarling heads emerge chaotically from the torso, unclear as to whether they possess a common intelligence or are simply multiple multiple brains driven by a destructive frenzy. Additional mouths filled with sharp fangs and multiple eyes are placed seemingly randomly across the creature's body, while limbs of varying sizes emerge from every point on the torso, bizarrely giving it great mobility on any terrain and the ability to reach speeds sufficient to stalk almost any type of prey. Perhaps if there are any creatures born straight from nightmares in Fallout, they are the many-headed centaurs, floaters. Continuing along the lines of creatures mutated by the forced evolutionary virus, we find the floaters. These are invertebrates that are part of the long list of experiments conducted by the Master. Their name derives from their ability to produce very light gases within their bodies, allowing them to float in mid-air. Despite their clumsy appearance, they use their sinuous bodies and extreme lightness to float around with agility and ambush their prey. They can often be seen in the company of centaurs, with whom they have a symbiotic relationship, or even super mutants, who often raise them as pets. They do not possess a true brain, but like many invertebrates, they have a nervous system that grants them minimal animal faculties. There are two variants of floaters, very different in appearance, but with similar biological characteristics. The floaters found on the west coast have a main body that doubles as a head, attached to which is a long tail that it whips through the air to propel itself. At the top of the head is a mouth from which the creature unfurls a long, tentacled tongue, culminating in a second mouth used to latch onto its victim, much like an alien. The gas they produce to support their weight is flammable, and, if exposed to high temperatures, ignites within moments. The floaters found in the Appalachian Mountains are what we might consider more of an evolution than a variant. Although similar in many features to their cousins, these monsters resemble bizarre balloons in appearance. The sac that produces the buoyant gas is located on the top of the head, and the main mouth is located on the front of the creature. It also has a large main eye, often accompanied by a varying number of smaller eyes, which are not always functional. In addition to the tail, Appalachian floaters also possess two long tentacled arms. Their entire body and limbs are covered in pulsating buboes, where the creature stores the powerful volatile gases it uses to fight. In this regard, the main difference from the West Coast floaters is the type of buoyant gas they can generate and use as a weapon. Depending on their habitat, these creatures develop the ability to generate up to 3 different types of gas, giving them different fluorescent colors: red for incendiary gas, blue for cryogenic gas, and green for acid gas. Snallygasters. Snallygasters are one of the bizarre creatures produced by the West Tech Research Center in an attempt to create stable, self-sustaining creatures using the forced evolutionary virus. This creature, however, was only the first step toward creating far more fearsome monsters. Snallygaster are grotesque, amorphous creatures. They move on 4 legs but possess 6 limbs. The 2 central arms are long and strong, but the creature typically uses them for support when resting rather than as a weapon against prey. The 2 upper arms, however, are agile and tapered, with 3 fingers on each hand, culminating in 3 claws, ideal for hunting. The head is always extended forward and is shaped like a large, eyeless bulb, almost entirely occupied by the glossa, a mouth full of dull but incredibly strong teeth. The eyes, however, are scattered across the torso, granting the Snallygaster a rather broad view of its surroundings. According to the scientists' plans, the creature was to be released near Huntersville to be monitored and studied in a natural environment. However, after a few years, some specimens eluded surveillance by sneaking past the control perimeter and spreading throughout the Appalachian mountain range. Grafton monster. There are many legends surrounding cryptids in the Appalachian Mountains. Mysterious creatures that inhabit the forests, unlike any other known animal, shadows that prowl at night, searching for lost hikers, ready to make them their next prey. The Grafton monster is precisely one such creature. It takes its name from the town near which it has been reportedly sighted several times, Grafton, West Virginia, and it was likely just one of many urban legends, until West Tech brought the myth to life. In fact, the Grafton monster is nothing more than an improved version of the Snallygaster, having used the same DNA strain in the hope that the physical stability of its predecessor would also apply to a new form. The final prototype was recognized by scientists as a success, having produced a perfectly stable specimen, despite the use of FEV. But the truth is that what they got was nothing more than another amorphous, violent, and uncontrollable abomination. The Grafton monster is a quadrupedal creature with an extremely stocky and powerful body, standing approximately 7.5 feet tall. Its 2 hind legs are shorter, while the front legs are long and extremely muscular, giving the monster a vaguely gorilla-like stance. At first glance, it doesn't appear to have a head, but in reality, it is completely recessed into its shoulders and enclosed within its exceptionally broad chest. Its body is also covered with glands that allow it to secrete an oily, extremely corrosive substance over a wide area around itself. It also appears to possess intelligence even lower than that of an animal, its only observed occupations being to wander aimlessly and attack with blind fury any life form it encounters. Once the experiments were concluded, the Grafton monster was was sedated and sent to the Ministry of Defense to evaluate its military uses. Unfortunately, this happened on the very day of the apocalypse. The intense light generated by the bomb's detonation caused the van driver to lose control of the vehicle. In a holotape recorded by the man himself, you can hear the sounds of the steel door being torn off and the creature walking away, finally free. Although this is the only incident we know of, we can encounter more than one Grafton monster in the game world. Why more of these aberrations are found in the Appalachian region today is a mystery. Super mutant behemoths. Finally, let's take a quick look at what we might consider the destructive pinnacle of the forced evolutionary virus, and the pinnacle of the super mutant race. Although the birth of these creatures was dictated more by the devastating randomness of fate than by any specific intention, in sheer size, it is probably the largest monster we'll ever encounter in all of Fallout. We're talking about the super mutant behemoth. Super mutants were once humans, who were the first to be experimented on with the forced evolutionary virus. The result of this exposure was the creation of an entirely new species, no longer comparable in their very identity to what they were before. Muscle development, loss of hair, increased size, and almost always, a decline in mental faculties. Super mutants are often hostile toward other species, and their developed taste for all kinds of meat does not help relationships. That said, the race possesses a wide variety of variants, as many as the FEV was capable of producing. But the one we're interested in today is by far the most dangerous. Truly mad giants, ready to trample and sweep away everything in their path. It seems that only super mutants originating on the East Coast have the potential to transform into behemoths. With no limit to the growth radiation can cause, these super mutants are likely the oldest specimens of their race, growing steadily year after year throughout their lives. Most specimens you encounter average 20 feet tall, but individuals over 30 feet tall have been encountered. Unfortunately, this effect seems to be accompanied by a near-total loss of intellectual ability, causing behemoths to slowly regress to a primal state where they are no longer capable of using any form of language other than guttural sounds. They can recognize their fellow creatures and follow very simple instructions, enough to allow them to enter battle armed with crude weapons, commensurate with their size and raise to the ground, anything unfortunate enough to stand in their way. Their humanity has been lost for centuries, and they are nothing more than veritable monsters, impossible to approach without a healthy dose of madness or a desire for death. Fog crawlers. Since the Mirelurks may not have been enough, let's now shift our focus to other crustaceans we never want to encounter, and talk about another extreme danger ready to tear us apart as soon as we set foot in its hunting ground, the fog crawler. This creature has a super resistant carapace, razor-sharp sickle-shaped legs, and a height similar to that of a grizzly bear on two legs, tall enough to even outshine super mutants, not to mention a terrible temper. Fog crawlers take their name from a particular type of fog, the fog, in which they hide to hunt their prey. As we've already seen with the gulpers, this mysterious fog covers Mount Desert Island and seems to be the cause of the extreme mutation of many creatures on the island. But what's truly curious is that such a trigger is not unique to that island. But we have a second similar yet completely unrelated case in the Appalachian mountain range. Here, in Vault 94, a Garden of Eden creation kit exploded, a device with the theoretical power to heal the radiation-contaminated land and allow new crops to be grown. The disaster caused considerable damage to the surrounding environment, even creating a radioactive fog similar to that found on Mount Desert Island. Thanks to this coincidence, new fog crawlers were able to develop in Appalachia, completely parallel to the specimens on the island. Due to their super predatory characteristics, these monsters are considered the most dangerous in the areas they inhabit. They are also capable of performing rudimentary signaling among members of the same species through low, guttural calls and organizing primitive, coordinated hunting strategies. Furthermore, unlike many mutated creatures, fog crawlers are also fertile. Although, due to some ancestral ritual implanted in their minds, they seem to seek out a mate to reproduce only during the nights of the new moon. Gatorclaws. Gatorclaws are the result of botched experiments with FEV at Nuka World's Safari Adventure Park, where they have currently built their nest. Their origins lie in the hands of a biologist named Dr. Darren McDermott, who studied animal reproduction in laboratories connected to the safari park. After the bombing, he was ghoulified, but decided to remain in the park and continue his studies. However, when various groups of bandits began plundering the park over the years, McDermott felt the need to develop a security system, something to keep unwanted guests away from his home. Thus, after discovering the corpse of a super mutant, he began a series of experiments aimed at creating a fearsome creature that would serve as the park's protector. After years of failed attempts, the doctor finally succeeded in developing the first Gatorclaw, a creature derived from the combined DNA of Jackson's chameleon and American alligator, influenced by the effects of FEV. However, the biologist's predictions soon proved far too optimistic. After releasing the first beasts into the park, he quickly realized they were not as controllable as he had hoped. They were feral and aggressive creatures, so much so that they immediately turned against their creator, nearly killing him. Having miraculously escaped the wrath of his own creations and unable to return to the lab to shut down the incubation machine, McDermott had no choice but to abandon the site and leave directions on how to reach the machine and stop the production of those deadly beasts, hoping that one day someone foolhardy enough to attempt the feat would come along. Gatorclaws are humanoid in appearance, having 2 legs and 2 arms, and preferring to walk on 2 legs. However, many of their characteristics recall the animal from which they take their name. They possess a robust tail that they can use as a weapon to lash out at their enemies. Their heads resemble those of alligators, with an elongated shape and wide mouth. Their skin is scaly, often covered with sharp spikes. The scales are incredibly resistant, allowing them to survive even numerous gunshots. Their claws are not particularly long, but they are extremely tough, allowing them to carve even the hardest materials. Fortunately, this monster can be encountered almost exclusively in the safari park area. However, Dr. McDermott in his messages has predicted the rapid expansion of their territory if the machinery that develops their embryos is not stopped soon. Deathclaws. Here we finally come to the icing on the cake, the monster of monsters, the creature you've all been waiting for, which has become a true icon and, in a way, the very symbol of the Fallout saga, the Deathclaw. Were you looking for the devil? Were you looking for a demon? You found it. Probably nothing in the world of Fallout beats the Deathclaws in terms of endurance, adaptability, and pure physical power. They are beings designed to be perfect machines of destruction, concentrating all the characteristics of the most fearsome predators in a single creature. The Deathclaw's DNA is based primarily on Jackson's chameleon, like the Gatorclaw, but it also incorporates an unknown number of forced genetic grafts and mutations. They can reach a height of 10 feet and an average weight of 1,600 pounds, although frighteningly larger specimens have been sighted. They generally move bipedally, but use their front legs to make short charges against enemies. The forelimbs are long and muscular, culminating in 5 clawed digits capable of cutting an unarmored human in 2 with a single blow. The hide is extremely thick and flexible, giving it extreme resistance to both slashing and blunt force damage. Energy weapons and heavier firearms are ideal for combating such a beast, but even basic versions of these can prove equally ineffective. Their origins lie in secret pre-war government experiments. During the escalation of the Sino-American War, the US government was seeking new weapons to use in the Alaskan conflict to reduce the loss of soldier lives. In this context, we know that for the first time, the Deathclaws were unleashed as true weapons of mass destruction, wiping out every trace of the invader in the territory. However, the army already realized they had gone too far. These creatures are pure predators, impossible to train, capable only of wreaking havoc. Following the apocalypse, many specimens escaped from their containment zones, spreading over the years throughout the United States. Despite their extreme danger and aggression, Deathclaws typically prefer to establish their nests in wilderness areas, far from human presence. This is likely because their highly developed senses make them highly sensitive to chaos and loud noises. They often even choose areas with high levels of radioactive contamination, where no other creature would survive, but where they find an ideal habitat, having developed total immunity to contamination. These monsters primarily operate in groups, although lone specimens can occasionally be encountered. The pack is always led by a pair, an alpha male and female, generally the 2 strongest specimens. The Deathclaw's mentality is almost obsessively oriented toward reproduction. The alpha impregnates all the females, and the other males contribute to protecting the eggs and new offspring. Because of this extreme instinct, eradicating a Deathclaw nest can prove nearly impossible unless all the individuals are exterminated, or at least the pack leaders are killed simultaneously. If only one of the 2 survives, it simply chooses a new mate in the hierarchy and continues to raise the next generation. In fact, the areas or buildings where Deathclaws have established their nests are often considered lost forever. There is a very particular and dramatic case involving this species. In 2023, the Enclave captured several specimens to evaluate, as the US Army had done 2 centuries earlier, their potential use as weapons. Seeking to learn from past mistakes, scientists dosed the creatures with the forced evolutionary virus, which made them highly intelligent and capable of understanding commands. Most of them demonstrated the same level of mental capacity as an 8-year-old child, but others later proved to be as intelligent as average humans, and even capable of reproducing a simple form of their language. These newly enhanced Deathclaws were first used in the evacuation of Vault 13, kidnapping its inhabitants. However, the more intelligent specimens soon began to question the morality of the Enclave's actions, ultimately organizing a full-blown rebellion that allowed them to escape the organization's clutches. Once they escaped escaped, the group took over Vault 13 itself, organizing themselves into a small, peaceful, and prosperous society. So much so that soon, despite the initial inevitable mistrust, many humans living in the areas surrounding the refuge decided to move inside to benefit from the protection of the Deathclaws themselves, creating a multi-species mini-society unlike anything ever seen in history. Unfortunately, this ideal could not last forever. The Enclave, determined to avenge the wrong they had suffered and having deemed the intelligent Deathclaws as unmanageable as their common relatives, decided to send a specialized strike team that, after a strenuous battle, exterminated the entire pack plus all the civilians present in the vault. A tragic end for what could have been a milestone towards the future of the Fallout world. As far as we know, however, 2 specimens survived the massacre. Gorus, the Deathclaw companion of the protagonist of the second video game, was far from the refuge at the time of the attack, pursuing the Chosen One. And Zarn, another specimen held by the same Enclave at their base in Navarro. After the events of Fallout 2, we have no further information regarding the fate of these 2 individuals, but we can imagine that at least one of them has found a way to continue the lineage. In fact, in Fallout Shelter, we will have the opportunity to meet not 1, but 2 intelligent Deathclaws, an unnamed specimen, and Kura, a female described as a wise Deathclaw. Even as of the TV show, Deathclaws remain a very real presence in the wasteland, and can tear apart both flesh and armor, at least whenever the plot calls for it. It just goes to show how the Deathclaw is truly the most horrifying monster in Fallout. This has been the most horrifying Fallout monsters explained. If you want to see every unique random encounter in Fallout 4 explained, click the video on the screen.